Hey guys! Just this morning, I had the pleasure of playing in a very small and exclusive Scrabble tournament hosted by my good friend and fellow top player Seth Lipkin. Now, in the first round of this tournament, I was fortunate enough to play against Seth himself, and it was quite a game. I've had many exciting battles with Seth over the years, but nothing could have prepared us for this amazing and ridiculous back and forth game that I was so excited about that I felt I had to rush and get on my channel this afternoon, like I said, just mere hours after it happened. Now, before I jump into this game, guys, it's worth mentioning that this game was played with a brand new set of official North American Scrabble tournament rules that went into effect just this morning, effective at midnight, which was before Seth's tournament started. Now, I'm not going to go over all of these rules now, as it's quite a lengthy list, and I will be going over them throughout the video, as they did have a significant impact, as you guys will see on my game with Seth that I'm about to show you guys. Let's go ahead and dive into this absolutely amazing game. I was first and had an opening rack of AEIQRTTUZ. Now, right off the bat, this is causing problems for the annotated game viewer because my opening rack had 9 tiles instead of the typical 7 you see on a Scrabble rack. Now, the tiles on rack modal is showing just 7 tiles, AEIQRTT, because that's what it's used to, but as you can see next to my name up here, I actually had 9 tiles, and I used those 9 tiles to make a very nice opening play, the double, triple, rarely seen, of quartzite for 272 points, jumping out into an early massive lead. Now, how on earth did this happen? Well, it has to do with those new rules I mentioned. Let's read the notes. Mac gets confused by the new tile drawing procedure to open a game outlined in Rule 4.b.5 and accidentally draws 9 tiles. Now, you're probably wondering, what is Rule 4.b.5? Well, as you guys can see on this screen, Rule 4.b.5 stipulates a new method for drawing tiles at the start of the game, instead of the conventional, the first player drawing 7 tiles and the second player drawing 7 tiles. According to this new rule, the first player opens by drawing 3 tiles, then the opponent draws 6 tiles, then the first player draws 4 tiles, and then the opponent draws their 1 remaining tile. Mac got confused, and after he drew 3 tiles and Seth drew 6, he thought he was also supposed to draw 6 and thus ended up with 9 tiles. What happened then? Well, he successfully flicks both additional tiles through Seth's uprights as outlined in Rule 4.b.4.a. What on earth is going on here? Well, if we look at Rule 4.b.4.a, it outlines a new method for handling an overdraw. Now, if a player overdraws by n tiles, they have to take away n plus 2 tiles from their rack and try to flick these tiles through a football upright formed by their opponent's thumbs and forefingers, as shown in this graphic. And then, each tile successfully flicked through these uprights can be kept on the offender's rack up to a total of 9 tiles. So here Mac overdrew by 2 tiles, and thus he took 4 tiles off of his rack, and he precisely flicked all 4 of these tiles through Seth's football uprights. So because of that, Mac was able to keep all 4 of those tiles for a total of 9 on his rack, and he just so happened to have this rack, and he opened with quartzite for, once again, the rarely seen double-triple, scoring a whopping 272 points. Now, we finally move on to Seth's turn. AHINRWY. Seth responds with whiny, a nice underlap under the Q, the U, and the A, but something happened. After making this play, Seth let out a very heavy sigh in response to Mac's gigantic opening play, which certainly wasn't what Seth was hoping to see, and because of that, Mac felt that Seth was being disruptive and called the director. And the director came over and noted that Rule 1.d.1, which says that heavy sighing and or moaning before any play totaling more than 40 points shall be penalized by the loss of 1 turn, should be enforced. Since Whiny scored 42, which is obviously more than 40, Seth was penalized with the loss of a turn, and as such, he would have to pass on his next turn, the last thing Seth wanted when he was already down 230 points after just 1 turn. And to make matters worse, or at least seemingly worse for Seth, Mac pulls both blanks after his opening 9-letter bingo, AEIOU blank blank. However, this is actually a good thing for Seth, because according to the new Scrabble rules, blanks are actually terrible. After all, blanks are the only tiles in the bag that score 0 points, So why the heck would you want to have a tile that scores 0 points when you could have tiles that score 1 point or even more? And because of that, Mac obediently gets rid of both of his blanks, playing Zzz for 10 points, since per Appendix 2.a of the new rules, players should strive at all times to hold tiles that are worth actual points. So, again, Mac just respecting the new rules here, getting rid of his 2 blanks and scoring 10 points in the process, upping his lead to 240. Seth draws AADGRRU out of the bag after Whiny, and he has to pass here as punishment for his sigh we talked about on his previous turn, so Mac gets another turn. And he's got garbage, AEIOOOU, pulling 2 more O's to replace his blanks he played with Zzz. And Mac here understandably opts to spend his turn to exchange tiles. He exchanges 6, keeping just his E. But something interesting happens. After Mac announces exchange 6 and puts these 6 vowels on the table, Seth, who's already, like I said, kind of in a bad mood, decides to try to stop Mac from exchanging and cleaning up his rack, and he declares that he wants to challenge the exchange. Now this sounds a little bit strange, right? Because normally challenges are done against plays on the board, and they challenge the validity of a play, but an exchange is not a play, so how does this work? Well, fortunately, the new rules cover this situation, even though it's actually not explicitly covered in the previous version of the tournament rules. Per new rule 4.1.5, Mac is permitted a second exchange for free. So let's see if Mac is able to take advantage of this. So that means poor Seth has to pass for the second consecutive turn as Mac gets another free exchange. Mac's rack post his initial exchange is not particularly good. He's got 2 U's and 2 E's, and he decides to use his exchange to trade off just one of his U's. A rather peculiar looking decision from such a clunky rack, but he's going for a cool bingo. Let's see if he hits it. Seth now finally gets to make a play, and he capitalizes, finding the very nice Gurdwara for 102, getting himself back somewhat in the game, but he is still down 138. And Mac draws an R, which is the exact tile he wanted, to play the bingo of Lauerer to the R in Quartzite. And something very bizarre happens here. After this rather absurd-looking bingo, Seth immediately says, "Hold!" And then he pretty quickly afterwards challenges the play since he doesn't think it's a word. And Mac calls the director on Seth because Mac is saying that Seth, as the lower-rated player, failed to do something he had to when he said hold. If we look, guys, at new rule 4.I.2, and in particular the final sentence of the rule, we see that now lower-rated players must complete their call of hold with a weak rising pitch to indicate subservience. So they need to say something like, hold. However, Seth failed to do that. All he said was, hold. And because Seth is lower rated than Mac, the director ruled that Seth's call of hold could not stand, and as such, Seth could not be allowed to challenge this play. However, then something else happened. This is not a valid word. My loyal YouTube viewers know that this is a famous and hilarious phony that my friend Andy Hung once tried to play against Jackson Smiley. It did not stay on the board. But there's another new rule, 4.M.1, that says the following. Playing a phony that has appeared in a Mac Meller YouTube video garners a 20-point bonus if challenged and a 50-point bonus if accepted. If the opponent fails to challenge, they must apologize to Mac in writing immediately after the game. So, since this play was not challenged, again, Seth wanted to challenge, but because he failed to say hold in a subservient way he wasn't allowed to, that meant that it stayed on the board, and as such, Mac receives a 50-point bonus, bringing his play score up from 62 to 112, and of course, Seth had to send a heartfelt apology to Mac in writing after the game, which I can confirm he did, and it was very nice. Anyway, moving on to the next turn, Seth has drawn EFFHIIS out of the bag following his bingo of Gurdwara, and he makes a huge play here, Filefish triple for 239, bringing his deficit now to just 11 points after that crazy strong start for Mac. The score now stands 394 for Mac, 383 for Seth. And another thing happened here. Mac challenged this word as, when you're not sure of a word and it scores 239 points, you probably want to challenge. But Seth was feeling really stoked about this, and he was also positive that this was a valid play. So as the two players were going up to the challenge computer, Seth turned around before Mac even judged the play and started walking back to the board, and definitely made a bit of a subtle sneer while doing so. Mac felt this was unsportsmanlike and called the director to penalize Seth for that sneer. And Seth is like, yeah, maybe I was a little cocky, but I didn't sneer. Well, since it's 2025, and thankfully we have video cameras everywhere, the director reviewed the closed-circuit TV and determined that Seth's lips did curl upward enough that a reasonable person using that legal standard would consider it to be a sneer. Because of that, Seth was assessed a 25-point penalty per Rule 4.I.3, which, in case you're wondering, and as you can see on the screen, behavior like what I've described shall result in a 25-point penalty being assessed against the offender. So Mac is going to still lose his turn because he challenged a valid word, and that's how Scrabble works and still works, but he is going to get 25 points added to his score, bringing him to 419. And Seth now, with a rack of IILMTTU, loses another turn. Why? Well, Mac called the director yet again against Seth for unsportsmanlike conduct after Seth failed to apologize 3 times after he won the challenge on the previous turn. Huh? You have to apologize 3 times after winning a challenge? Yes, now you do. Because if you guys look at new rule 4.I.4, it states that a lower rated player who wins a challenge must apologize to the higher rated player thrice before replacing tiles onto his or her rack. And as I said before, Seth is lower rated than Mac. And Seth argues that he did apologize 3 times, but again, the director reviewed the footage and it was found that Seth failed to do so. He only apologized twice. And the penalty in the new rule isn't exactly clear, but the director decides that the most appropriate penalty is to penalize Seth with the loss of a turn. So Seth now loses yet another turn by penalty this game, and it goes back to Mac. Mac, once again with the same rack as before, decides to pass again. This time a voluntary pass as opposed to the pass on his last turn, which was due to the lost challenge. And this time he says he passes as he's hoping for something cool. But Seth now challenges the pass, citing new rule 4.E.2, which, if we look at it, simply says, "You shall not pass." And in a very bizarre logical twist here, the director agrees with Seth, saying, well, yeah, Mac's play is explicitly forbidden by the rules, so it's invalid and he should lose a turn just like it would be if he made an invalid word on the board. But then Mac's like, all right, well, the penalty for a lost challenge is a pass, and I wanted to pass anyway, so this works out great. And Mac passes. So basically a new rule that, when it gets enforced, results in the same thing happening. Strange. Anyway, Seth's turn. Same rack, he finds a really nice play, multi-unit, his only playable bingo for 62 points, and for the first time this game, despite being down 272 to nothing at the beginning, Seth is up. He's up 445 to 419. And Mac, now staring at the same rack for the 3rd consecutive turn, gets the letter he was hoping for, the L, finding a triply disconnected 10, goaltender, for 74 points. Really nice play. However, Mac is going to get a 10-point penalty because, according to new rule 3.F.5, which you guys can see on your screen here, if a play includes 3 or more existing disconnected tiles or words, the player shall be penalized 10 points for showboating. So Mac has showboated here, and as such, Seth is going to get 10 bonus points after his next play. Seth has a pretty bad rack here after his bingo, AIJOVVY. Seth here plays a word that most Scrabble players only ever get to play in their wildest dreams. He plays Ziziva, extending Ziz on the board for 56 points, an amazing play. However, there's a problem. Seth has misspelled Ziziva. Ziziva is a famous word because it's the name of a well-known word study program in Scrabble, and until ZZZ was added to the dictionary several years back, it was the last word in the dictionary. But it's properly spelled ZYZZYVA, not ZZZYVVA. And as soon as Seth places this misspelling on the board, Mac shouts, "Hold!" extremely loudly. After which Seth immediately calls the director because Seth felt that was excessively loud and rather unsportsmanlike. And Seth was correct, because New rule 4.I.2, which we looked at the last sentence of earlier, also stipulates that if you're the higher rated player, the maximum permitted volume of your hold in decibels is equal to 60 plus your rating minus your opponent's rating times 0.132. Now, as of today, the rating difference between these two players is almost exactly 100 points. So that means the maximum acceptable volume of max hold is just about 60 plus 100 times 0.132, or 60 plus 13, or about 73 decibels. And the director didn't even bring out his sound meter. He was like, yeah, that was definitely more than 73 decibels. Mac, unacceptable hold, you lose your turn. And it's worth mentioning that Seth also got 10 bonus points here as a result of Mac's showboating penalty for his disconnected 10 of goaltender on the previous turn. That's why Seth got 56 points for this play, even though it looks like it should be 46. Anyway, moving on. Mac, with a lot of constants here, ACCDKLM, gets to play his own name, which is pretty cool, and according to the new rules, actually nets 20 extra points if we look at rule 4.N.8. Now, Seth, unfortunately, is not a valid word, so he is not going to be eligible for this bonus at any point during the game. It's too bad, but it's not Mac's fault, and Mac eagerly takes advantage of it, playing his own name and getting 62 points instead of the normal 42 for this play of Mac. Seth responds with Juke for 45 points, and Mac is now narrowly in the lead, 555 to 546, and finds another amazing play here with a rack of AACDELO, Sacerdotal, through a disconnected S, R, and T. So Mac is going to incur another 10-point showboating penalty, which will be added to Seth's score after his next play. Something else interesting happened here. After this play, Seth held, because he had never seen this word before, and then he was like, yeah, I know you study tens, Mac. I'm not sure this is good, but whatever. And there's a new rule, 4.H.2, that forbids non-committal statements of play acceptance. As you guys can see, it says that non-committal statements, like, I don't think that's good, or I suppose I'll let it go, will be met with sharp glares. Second offenses of this rule will be penalized by having the judging computer set to be 40% more lenient. For example, in an NWL game, the lexicon that these players were using, the computer will be set to Collins. For a Collins game, which doesn't apply here, the computer will be set to all combinations of letters are valid. Again, pretty drastic, but that doesn't apply here. So Seth now needs to be careful, because if he gets caught doing this again, then the challenge computer is going to be set to Collins, and that's going to drastically increase the amount of words Mac can play and get by. So Seth has to be careful. Seth, in any case, with a rack of BEEINSX, plays next for 52 points, 42 plus the 10 points for Mac's showboating penalty for his second triply disconnected 10 of the game. Mac draws well here, AEGINOS. He's got several playable bingos, and he goes with Ganwans for 60 points. And here, guys, another interesting thing happens. Seth holds yet again. And this time he's like, shoot, I can't remember if this play is Collins only. And Seth then decides to challenge. But then Mac is like, wait a second. Shoot, I can't remember if that's Collins only. That sounds like another non-committal statement. If you recall, Seth just made one on the previous turn. So the director agrees with Mac, saying that, yeah, Seth has just now made his second offense of this rule, which I've just pulled up on the screen again. Once again, this game was played with NWL, so because Seth has now made a second offense, the challenge computer for this turn is going to be set to Collins. And guess what, guys? Ganwans is a Collins-only bingo. So Seth challenges this play, which normally would come off the board, but because he wasn't just like, challenge, he was like, yeah, shoot, I can't remember if that's Collins only, because he was cagey, he ends up challenging what now becomes a valid word. And as such, Seth loses his turn. Very costly, given Mac is now up 105 points, and that should more or less lock up the game. Or should it? Mac plays Bop for 27, a rare, uneventful turn as far as chaos goes with the new rules. Seth, now stuck with that same rack, decides it's time to get desperate and open up a new bingo line given the size of his deficit. he plays BES for 18 points, dangling an S between two triple word scores. And Mac now decides that he should block the S on the bottom row. Interestingly, Seth is threatening valid bingos in two spots. Seth can play wine sops to the S in BES, which would score 98 points, and he can also play swine pox to the X in Nix, which would score 92. So, since 98 is more than 92, Mac figures he should block the 98 pointer, and he plays gentles for 27. But as you guys can see, based on the length of this annotation, a lot of things went down with this play, and Mac incurred 3 different penalties. Let's go over these in order. Number 1. Prior to making this play, Mac counted the number of remaining tiles in the bag. After all, players will often do this because it's important to know whether the bag is empty, or if it's not empty, whether there are 1 or 2 or however many tiles left in the bag. After making this play, Mac told Seth that there were -2 tiles remaining in the bag, just to, I guess, mess with him. But Seth was like, wait a minute, you can't do that. New rule 4.c.2 explicitly stipulates in the last sentence that announcing a negative number of tiles carries a 10-point penalty. So because of that, Mac is penalized 10 points, but that wasn't all. After Mac played gentles, but before he pressed his clock and ended his turn, Mac sneezed twice pretty quickly. And according to new rule 1.d.3, sneezing, even though it's physiologically necessary, is against the rules. And each bout of sneezing will incur a 10-point penalty. Now, how is a bout of sneezing defined? Seth was saying that these 2 sneezes that Mac made constituted 2 separate bouts. Mac was like, no, they were part of the same bout of sneezes. According to this new rule, as you guys can see, multiple sneezes constitute 1 bout if there are no sneezes within that bout that are more than 5 seconds apart. The director reviewed the footage and found that the time between Mac's 2 sneezes was between 3 and 4 seconds, clearly less than 5 seconds, so these sneezes counted as just 1 bout, and Mac was penalized 10 points for these sneezes. But that wasn't all. Mac incurred a 3rd penalty, an even more steep one on this play. After Mac hit his clock, Mac failed to recognize that he had just a single tile left and say Uno within 5 seconds. Just like in the card game Uno, where when you have 1 card left, as many of you guys probably know, you have to say the word Uno, you now have to do that in Scrabble as of today. Per new rule 5.b.1, you get 5 seconds to do this after you make your play when you have just 1 tile left at the end of the game, and if you fail to do that, you're going to get penalized 25 points if your opponent calls you out. Well, Seth definitely called Mac out here. After just 5.1 seconds, Seth very eagerly was like, hey Mac, you didn't say Uno, and that's a 25-point penalty. So when you add 10 for the negative number of tiles in the bag, 10 for the sneezing, and 25 for the failure to say Uno, that is a whopping 45 points of penalties that Mac has incurred with this play. Whew, that was a lot. Now, Seth bingos out with swinepox as Mac foresaw. However, Mac did not foresee 45 points of penalties. Mac thought he was going to still win this game handily after Seth's bingo of swinepox because he thought it was going to score 92. Well, guess what, guys? 92 plus 45 is 137. That brings Seth to 753. And he catches Mac with an unplayed D. That brings Seth to 757. Mac had 757 after gentles. This game ends with a tie, 757 to 757. What a game of Scrabble. Absolutely amazing stuff. Wow, what a game, wasn't it? That was pretty awesome. And like I said, it just happened a few hours ago, so I am still really excited and wired up from it. However, if you guys made it this far in the video, I do have to tell you something. It's April Fool's Day today, guys. That game didn't happen. And what's even more amazing is that this was inspired by an awesome April Fool's joke that Seth Lipkin himself made 13 years ago to the day. Seth actually invented a bunch of these fake rules and posted them on his site Crosstables, saying that these were the new Scrabble rules. I took many of Seth's rules from that post 13 years ago and used them in this video, so thanks very much to Seth for giving me the permission to do that. I really do appreciate it. I also added some of my own, which I thought were really fun and creative. But the original idea was Seth, and I wanted to make sure to give him his props for that. So, like I said, not a real game, guys, but really fun stuff. I hope you enjoyed it, and enjoy the rest of your April Fool's Day. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to my channel. I say that seriously, not as a joke, by the way. It really does help my channel, as well as leaving a comment and liking the video. Thank you all for all your support. Enjoy the rest of the day, and I'll see you all soon for the next video, which probably won't be a prank. Bye, guys.